Okay. It's a love story, but it's more than that. It takes place in a setting where, in Echo Park, which has been gentrified, and it's been very hard. Echo Park, it was very hard for me to face that because I grew up around there. So the streets that I'm going to talk about here are streets that my mom and I used to walk, where we used to hang out when, we would get on the bus and, do our thing, shop. And then I got back from college, and Echo Park is not my city anymore. It's not affordable, and yeah, he got priced out. And so it's been very, very hard it's just not the same at all. So this is called Don Daniel the Poet. Don Daniel sits on a little mint green painted bench just outside an empty but fancy bookstore off Sunset Boulevard in Echo Park. He sits there every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and admires Mari, who happens to sell hot dogs wrapped in greasy bacon just a couple feet away the same days. He parks his rusty market cart full of oranges and mangoes beside him while she grills, prepares, and avoids Don Daniel's love-struck eyes. Mari got there first, 5 years ago, working in front of what used to be a bridal and quinceañera boutique before it was replaced by the bookstore. She used to like seeing the mostly happy faces of the brides-to-be and quinceañeras carrying their very large plastic and knotted bags, protecting their lacy and opulent dresses. What Mari liked most about working in front of the boutique was that these women never stopped indulging in hot dogs. But now Mari stands in front of a bookstore where those that come out completely ignore her. Hot dogs, $2. But the two skinny, oily-haired hipsters with books in their hands pass her by. Mari rubs her forehead, sits on her red mini stool, and stares straight into space with a look of defeat and desperation. Don Daniel sees Mari for the very first time. He sits on the mint green painted bench for a break. He takes his Chivas cap off, takes out a white yellow-stained handkerchief out of his pocket, and wipes his forehead. He too stares into space and looks in his cart, still full of fruit, already late in the afternoon. He sighs and notices Mari and her hands. They are beautiful. They are small, dark, and plump. Her fingers short, and her nails are chipped with orange nail polish. He wants to hold them. He notices a ring she wears on her left hand, ignores it, and imagines her hand as loving, humble hands. Nurturing hands, warm and gentle hands, the hands God sent down to wipe his soul clean from the clutter he had accumulated on it all his life. He fell in love with them. She stands up and notices Don Daniel. It is as if she knew Don Daniel was staring at her hands because she hides them in her pockets. The dark sunspots on her cheeks add to the beauty of her hands, the beauty of a woman who has worked hard. She smiles at Don Daniel and starts cleaning up. He checks his pockets. He finds $1 in change, a pocket-sized laminated picture of La Virgen de Guadalupe, and a pen. She opens her cooler and dumps the water onto the street. He doesn't have enough for a hot dog. She smiles at him again. He thinks about her reaction if he were to ask for credit. She cleans her griddle with a damp towel. He suddenly stands up with unexpected courage, checks his pockets, once again, puts his sweaty hands on his cart's handle, ready to talk to her about anything. She scrubs. Not knowing how, Don Daniel instead walks past Mari with his eyes buried in his cart. She looks at him as he pushes his cart east on Sunset, struggling up the hills of Echo Park, until he becomes a silhouette on the night's full moon. On top of the hill the next morning, Don Daniel stands adjusting his best shirt, the long sleeve buttoned down, white one with the smiley face stitch over the lip of the front pocket and embroidered scorpion sitting underneath. He pinches the front crease on the front of each slack leg from top to bottom and dusts his newly shined plain black sneakers with his hand. He notices he has coloring agent on his hand, looks around to find a solution, sees his old spiral notebook in the cart where he writes the names and amounts of all those that owe him for fruit. Opens it, tears the sheet out, and wipes his hands. He grumbles and tosses it. He combs his gray hair to the side with his fingers, checks his pocket, takes $2 out, puts it back in his pocket, takes a deep breath, and starts his trip down the hill. Halfway down the hill, he sees Mari. She sits on her red stool, stares at her toes. As he comes closer, he notices as she talks to herself, mumbles. Her elbows are on her knees, and her hands hold a disillusioned face. He walks past her to the mint green bench, except Someone sits there, a girl who fights on the phone with a little furry white cotton ball looking dog that growls at Don Daniel. He doesn't want to sit next to her, so he starts browsing the 99-cent book rack outside the bookstore next to the bench. The dog barks. He takes a book on Lacan, opens it, attempts to read a line, and utters "Que chingados." He puts it back, takes another book, one that reads French feminism on the cover. El feminismo, mujeres, he utters to himself happily. But once again, he opens it. The thing makes no sense to him. The girl and the cotton ball finally leave. He takes the spot with the book in his hand and pretends to read. Don Daniel has no idea Mari's watching him the whole time. He sits down, looks at her, and makes eye contact. Good book? Mari laughs. He shakes his head. The words on the page become one tangled mess. His teeth chatter like maracas. The bile rises, but he swallows, stands up, throws the book on the bench, and walks toward Mari. He sticks his hand in his pocket and touches the 2 $1 bills. Eventually, Mari gives Don Daniel dark under eye circles. He tosses and turns every night after he bought that first hot dog from her. He likes that she covers her mouth when she laughs. He purposely makes her laugh every week so that he can see more of her hands. But he can't compliment them. The gold ring on her left hand is a reminder. He looks at them all the time, and she hides them behind her in her pockets, or she crosses her arms. He thinks about her all night, of that thing on her finger. He can't say anything. Sometimes the tears of longing roll down his face. Sometimes he feels love aches in his chest, the sole of his feet, his teeth. He walks around his small apartment with no direction. He feels suffocated and sick most nights. His head starts throbbing and his intestines feel twisted until he starts writing about her. He writes about her on anything he can find, on anything, as long as it soothes his aches at the point where he can't take it any longer. He writes on old receipts, napkins, the pink pan dulce manteca spotted box, toilet paper, his hands on his walls, the corner La Opinion, trash mail, public walls, and his old beat-up spiral notebook he carries with him always. With time, Don Daniel's fruit starts rotting. Oiga, ¿de qué tanto escribe usted? He didn't think she would ever ask such a question. He never thought she noticed he wrote so much. She must have, the few times she had customers, and he sat on the mint green bench with his notebook. De usted, he says. She blushes and looks away. Don Daniel quickly gets off the bench and doesn't realize he leaves his notebook. He walks by Mari, who is helping a customer. She waits. It is past 9 and the owner of the bookstore starts to roll the 99-cent book rack and bench inside the store. It isn't until Don Daniel gets home that he realizes his notebook is missing. It is now past 10. He looks inside the cart, digs through the rotten fruit. He sprints down the hill. Aguas, an older, angry man yells. The streets are empty. Most stores are closed with the exception of those owners who are closing their old and rusty accordion gates. When Don Daniel gets to the bookstore, Mari is gone. He presses his nose on the store's front window and sees nothing but the bench, the rack, and books. It is the first time he sees the inside of the bookstore, where he has been sitting in front of for weeks. Don Daniel doesn't write that night. He doesn't sleep either. He thinks of all the possible people that could have his notebook, and the thought makes him bite his pillow and attempt to rip it with his teeth. If he dropped it by the bookstore, and if a bookstore customer, a usual Sunset Boulevard jogger, picked it up, then it wouldn't be a problem. He doubted any of them would be able to read in Spanish, but who knows? What made him really nervous were not the bookstore hipsters, but those that knew him well, his personal customers, the people he chatted with at the carniceria and panaderia, those that he occasionally played dominoes with at the park. He digs his head in the pillow. They will know for certain he is writing about Mari. They know her too. They all know her. If one of the women he knows finds it, they will tell all the other women, like the chismosas they are that him, Don Daniel, el señor de las naranjas y mangos, está enamoradísimo. And then, of course, warn her to stay away from a man that can barely afford her hot dogs. He didn't know if it was worse or if one of the men he knew found it and told the other men that him, el señor Don Daniel, was effeminate, a piña, una mariposa for writing love poetry. After all, real men don't write, especially poetry. That is what they would say. And soon enough, he would have to leave Echo Park because anyone that knew him by Don Daniel Perez would know that he is the same Daniel Perez whose name is written on the inside cover of the notebook in bold black marker. couple fruit flies attempt to enter Don Daniel's nose early Monday morning. He slaps his face, snorts many times, and remembers his old notebook. He only fell asleep an hour ago. His old Apex clock radio reads 7 a.m. Although tired, he walks the streets and looks for his notebook one last time. He gets ready and dumps the mold-infested fruit in the empty dumpster bin just outside his apartment, double handfuls at a time. Each time the fruit hits the bottom of the dumpster echoes loudly, making Don Daniel feel as if he were being hit on the head with a pan. He hurries the process and abandons the cart outside the apartment. He takes La Virgen de Guadalupe out of his pocket, kisses it, and prays. Ayúdame a buscar mi cuaderno, Virgencita. Ayúdame a olvidar esta obsesión, poder trabajar otra vez. Amen. He kisses her again and puts her inside his pocket. He walks with his head down, looking everywhere. He walks down the hill and thinks of Mari's hands, how he wishes she could hold his hand, caress it, and assure him that the notebook had fallen in the sewer, that by now the thing was wet and dirty, its ink completely smeared and unreadable. She would assure him that he could fill another notebook with poetry of her, better poetry, the poetry of a god. And he stops for a second. Who would actually pick up an old beat-up notebook? Who would care enough, even if found, to even talk about it? He didn't know if it was La Virgencita or Mari that made him feel better. Nevertheless, he attempts to find it one last time. He gets to the bookstore, looks through the window. The lights are on, but he sees no one. He hopes the güera who closed the store last night is around. If anyone would know where his notebook is, it would be her. He sits on the minty bench and thinks how he would ask anyone in there if they had found his notebook. He practices his greeting in English. It is the only thing he really learned before dropping out of night school to sell fruit. Good morning, he says under his breath. How are you? I like your jacket. And then his English runs out. What was he going to do if she wasn't wearing a jacket? He looks inside the empty store and still sees no one. He looks at the empty space where Mari usually parks her hot dog cart. Sitting there isn't the same without her. Again, he gains courage. And what was he scared of anyway? He has every right to enter this woman's business and ask a simple question. He isn't a piña, that is for certain. He enters the bookstore and smells dust and gourmet-labeled coffee. He picks up the first book he sees off the shelf. He opens it and it is in English. He walks around, picks up any random book in English. He starts looking around for genres instead. He looks for Español, but he walks in circles around the small bookstore and never finds a book written in Spanish. This doesn't surprise him. He wonders if the store is actually open because he wants to ask this question and run out of the dusty place. Good morning, Don Daniel's voice echoed. The same woman that closed the door the night before appears, and she is not wearing a jacket. Good morning, sir. How can I help you? She speaks slowly. She gets closer to him, leaving very little personal space between the two. He feels uncomfortable and moves back a little. She has large blue eyes, and it seems she rarely blinks. Yesterday, creo que dejó un cuaderno aquí cerca. Don Daniel frames an imaginary rectangle in front of him, tries to describe his notebook. She looks at him, bites her index nail, and shakes her head. I don't know, sir. I don't understand. Sorry. Defeated, he turns around and starts walking out. When by the register, he sees his notebook. He turns to face the woman, but she is already gone. He then grabs it and runs out. He can't believe it. He runs up the hill with the notebook in his hand. No one has read it. He opens it, flips through the pages. He has one more blank page left. He starts writing and soon fills up the entire page. Half the page he devoted to his love for Mari, and the other half prayer of gratitude to La Virgen de Guadalupe. He fills his cart with fresh mangoes, oranges and mangoes, and travels the streets of Echo Park selling more fruit than he had in weeks. On Saturday, he sees Mari, buys a hot dog, compliments her the beauty of her hands, and opens his notebook. He reads his poetry to her. He stands proud, reads with so much passion and love and humility. People walk by, stare, and others laugh, but he keeps reading. It is the poetry of God. He closes his book. She blushes and claps so much her hands hurt. Para usted, Mari. The end.